Hello, Jim12 here, and today is the 9th of March 2023. I'm just off the Great North Walk, northwest of Cherrybrook, northeast of Cherrybrook. And today's video I've entitled Cold War 2.0. Yes, the media won't have been talking about Cold War II, but I am, so here goes. Let me put a few thoughts down for you. Today, in the Daily Declaration, I've got an article out entitled Armageddon, Part 1, The Berlin Airlift. I commend that article to you. Have a read, the link is below, and while you're at it, looking down there, do please subscribe if you haven't done so already, and hit the bell for future videos. Thank you. So why on earth have I written an article called Armageddon? And I've got 3 parts coming out. The first one, as I said, today, 9th of March. Well, Armageddon is the title of a book by Leon Uris, and it's a novel, but it's set on historical fact, based on the events at the end of World War II, in Berlin in particular, and how the Allies flew in coal, food, you name it, medicines into the people of Berlin, who were basically under siege from the Russians, the communists. So do have a read. So that book, Leon Uris' book, really, if you like, was the subplot was the origins of the Cold War, the first Cold War. And it was quite extraordinary that in those days there were so many people who didn't believe there could be a Cold War, or what on earth was a Cold War. We've just finished World War II, we don't need any more wars, thank you very much, that's enough now. But the soldiers on the ground in Berlin and the residents of Berlin, I would argue they were the first to know what Cold War was, and it basically grew out of their experience. And it was a war between the West and the East, between the Western countries, typically the Allies in World War II, and Russia, on the other hand, the communists. And the communists were wanting to spread further westwards, and basically the Western nations said, enough, stop here. And as we all know, there was eventually a Berlin Wall built right through the middle of Berlin, and that was the physical manifestation of the Cold War. That's as far as the communists advanced from the East, and the Western nations said, enough, we're not having you go any further. My second point today is I would argue that the war in Ukraine, which is now over a year old, is an escalation of Cold War 1.0, because it's actually the West fighting Russia, the democratic countries fighting the communist country in a war, not a Cold War, an actual war of devastation, deplorable loss of life and property, and utter evil waste. And I'm certainly all for ending that war as soon as possible, and anything that can possibly be done to turn that back, the better. So, number 3, are we in Cold War 2.0? And I would argue, yes, we are. Where did I get the idea from? Well, Leon Ernest's book, yes, but also from Andrew Murray's book, The War on the West, where he explains that it isn't an external nation or nations that have come to threaten the Western society. It's a movement from within the Western society, culture, that is warring against itself. It's like a muscle-eating disease that is seeking to draw the life out of what's left of Western civilization, a self-destructive force, if you will. So the enemy in Cold War 2.0, the enemy can be described as traditional Western values, which are based on Judeo-Christian faith. That's the enemy. That, I would argue, is the foundation of our civilization. That is the enemy. Out of that Judeo-Christian faith came arguably one of the most important documents since the Bible. It's a bit of a big statement for me to make, but I would say it's true. The American Constitution. The American Constitution came out of people with an absolute genuine faith in God. And therefore, the American Constitution is the enemy. Anything to do with traditional values and traditional respect is under attack. And who is the adversary in this Cold War 2.0? I would argue the globalist agenda. They're the adversary. They are pushing for the destruction of the traditional Western values, which arguably celebrate the nation state. The globalists see any taint of nationalism as being old school, being a relic of the past and needs to be removed. I find that really ironic, because America is pouring billions into Ukraine, a nation, to fight against another nation. I find that very ironic, if the nation state is so unimportant and should be demolished. I think the neocons, or the new communists, are the adversary, those who would like equality for all. I don't think that works. You name me any communist state or any communist system down through history that has worked. I think the green agenda is the adversary, one which would have us all change our energy source at a stroke and completely ditch the use of fossil fuels even before there's any viable alternative. I think the agenda of fear is also the adversary, because if a population can be stoked in their fear, they'll do anything that an authority figure suggests to them. So for one, I'm saying no to fear. I don't need to fear. I'm certainly not fearing any so-called virus. The woke agenda is the adversary, one that will tell me how to think and what words and adjectives I'm allowed to say. The new racism is an adversary, one that is actually not promoting unity and harmony and peace among men. It's actually stoking division. Any idea of submission to authority and passivity is also an adversary. The opposite of that is confrontation. Now, I don't see there's anything wrong with healthy confrontation if we see something is wrong. If I see somebody being ill-treated, I will naturally stand up for them, and I hope we all would. So let's look out for injustice and take a stand against injustice. And not be cowered into submission because it is seen to be old school. And finally, the adversary is the attitude that all religions should be celebrated equally, except Christianity, which needs to be annihilated as soon as possible. So I would argue that we're into Cold War II. Let's get our armour on. Watch out for Armageddon Part 2 and Armageddon Part 3 on the Daily Declaration. Bye for now, folks. Bye.